Running through all of these issues is a common thread of race and the changing color of the country. It is this reality that taps into a reservoir of fear and anger and hatred that runs deep in the psyche of this nation. This is not new. It is what has galvanized white supremacy from the time of slavery on. What is new, however, is this realization that our demographics will have shifted somewhere around 2040 and make us no longer a nation of white majority. We maintain that this is the reality and the driving force and source of fear that results in laws aimed to move us toward a more inclusive and just society, and that has set loose the current wave of racial violence, bigotry, and xenophobia. It results in efforts now to accelerate deportation of brown and black people and close the door on immigration of brown and black people, all under the guise of national security. All of this in the face of massive human migration caused by war, poverty, and oppression by despotic leaders on killing sprees that cause people to literally run for their lives. Some of those despotic leaders have benefited from support from the United States of America. The most virulent forms of racism are mostly self-evident and observable. By that I mean, we see this in the parade of torches, the physical attacks and assaults on dark-skinned bodies. We hear it in the language of border walls and expedited deportations and references to shithole nations, and we observe the patterns and the dappled shadows of racism that are cast on voter ID laws and false claims of voter fraud. But the real challenge has long been and continues to be the manifestation of racism that is subtle, camouflaged, pretending to be something other than what it actually is, and asserting the pretense of being past tense. It's not so easy to see racism hiding in progressive structures of white power, where it sits in congenial corporate board meetings and in congregational committee meetings. In his book, The End of White Christian America, I hope some of you know this book, Robbie Jones names two major issues at play in the demise of white Christian America. First, the inability to come to terms with its historic failure to address issues of race, and secondly, its struggle to understand and embrace issues of sexual orientation and gender. Some of you may have seen on the New York Times front page a week or two ago, Sunday edition, I believe, where people of color are leaving evangelical churches because they do not address the concerns of people of color or name some of these diseases that oppress this culture. We are convinced that the strongest defense against racism, sexism, all the isms of this nation is to develop multiracial, multicultural communities of faith. We work on that here every day. We give a great deal of thought to it. We think we have figured a few things out, which we hope we might be able to share with you. And this is a bold-faced plug that you might consider buying our book that's at the bookstore called the Pentecost Paradigm. So take a look at that and see if it might be a resource for you. If we leave these issues to advocacy groups and the courts, we will have missed our calling to be the healers, the revolutionary lovers we are called to be. And this is a calling. Division based on race and culture can only be worked out in diverse community. We can't maintain ourselves in silos of difference and address this issue. Every community of faith, every congregation must now understand and address issues of racial justice as a spiritual discipline. It is the prophetic imperative for these times, and the call to do so rests fundamentally upon white faith communities, their leaders, and their congregants. To these issues, we ask that the work that needs to be done be claimed by these communities, that we might change the story of race in America. If we fail to do so, we will confirm the view of many religion dropouts that institutions of faith are dead ends to meaningful progress in this country. All of the above has added to a national identity crisis, which I believe was kicked off by the election of Barack Obama to the presidency of the United States. Of course, this is not the first time we have had an identity crisis. This occurs on an ongoing cycle in an unfolding story. But it is important to know that every time this nation has experienced such a crisis, it was fundamentally about its own soul. And make no mistake about it, we are in a contest now for the soul of this country. We're asking, or many are asking, who are we if we are not predominantly white, Christian, and a nation unburdened, having to navigate the complexities of diversity and justice for all? So much easier to maintain the status quo of white supremacy. I want to ask these questions. What will be the moral center for us as a people? Who do we aspire to become as a nation? What laws and governing principles will be enacted to define us? How will we relate to the global community of nations through our foreign policy? As long as the answers to these questions are based on pigmentation, we will fail to create the world we want. And I want to suggest that faith communities need to know a whole lot more about our foreign policy as a nation. If we intend to envision a world at peace, a world pursuing justice, we need to know a little more about how we're relating to that world. And if you really want to work at that, a good starting place I recommend is Noam Chomsky's book, Who Rules the World? You might check that out. As the nation engages in clarifying its identity, so must our faith communities. We reside at a critical time in history. We who are religious leaders must now commit to a vision of social justice that is countercultural in every way and announces the dream of a world that lives in peace and strives for justice for all. We cannot wait for the government to fix things. We cannot wait for corporations to fix things. We cannot wait for states to fix things. We cannot wait. We have a moral and spiritual mandate, the leadership responsibility of showing up, to do the work of waking up and mounting up with courage to be a movement now for justice and equality. It is the task of spiritual leadership to step out and announce the dream of a healed and reconciled world, and to confront the dream stealers who are content with the status quo, where the identity of too many faith communities is still determined by skin color. One of King's enduring questions is this: where do we go from here? Let us now ask that question of each other.
We were having a conversation this morning about taking risks, creating a little conflict to address the hot mess that is America. And one of the things I said playfully, but it's true, is that I feel like I'm on a speaking circuit right now. Valerie and I had a chance to do a tour together called Together. And I feel like since then, I've been on a tour of lots of white spaces. I am the black woman talking about race to white people all over America. I just love it. I feel like I'm called to it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, okay, let's do it. So a few weeks ago, I was up in Massachusetts talking to a bunch. Yay, Super Saturday. Come on, Massachusetts. And we were talking about anti-racist work as a spiritual practice. And I said something in an answer to a question like, what if we located anti-racist work in God's dream for a healed humanity? And I really didn't think that was so profoundly badass. But they did. And this one man approached me afterwards and he said, I never thought about that, about casting this anti-racist work as part of what God is calling us to do. Now, in this room, more and more, we're less Christian. We're Unitarians. Woo! Yeah, we're Sikh. Woo! We're Muslim. Okay, got some work to do. We're Jewish. Okay, more work to do. We're all kinds of Christian, and our movement is interreligious and interfaith, so some of us don't do deity. But whatever it is that we call that force that is more than us, love. Help me. Okay, that was hard to hear. What? The goddess. Spirit. Universe. The source. Buddha nature. Tabayam. Love, right? You know what we're talking about, yeah? That force does not expect us to dehumanize one another. That force does not expect us to other each other. That force do not authorize white supremacy. I was talking to a white supremacist the other day. That was special. And what I heard kind of blew my mind. The sense that, try not to be outraged. Okay, be outraged. The sense that somehow the true chosen people are not the Jews. That the Jews, I'm talking Hebrew scripture now, that the Jews are not really the chosen ones. They made that up. That's a fraud. And that white people are the true chosen people. Aryan white people are the true chosen people. Doesn't that make you just want to hiss and boo? Talking to my friend Brian McLaren earlier this morning, somehow Christianity especially has been whitened and empired, and like there's a social contract inside of the faith called Christian that if we focus on, I'm stealing this from Brian, sin in quotes, like you slept with somebody, you smoked a cigarette, you told a lie, you broke a rule. If we keep our eyes on that, then we don't have to notice white supremacy. We don't have to notice that capitalism and white supremacy marginalizes. We don't have to notice that the real religion of America is whiteness.
Amen.
Okay. I think every congregation, every community of faith, every community that can be in America should be racially, ethnically diverse. Amen. And that if it's not that, just being a Christian pastor now, albeit a closet UU, do it again, UUs, woo! Okay. A closet universalist, believing there's more than one path to God, my faith commands me. My multiracial, multi-ethnic Jesus, Yeshua, commands me to expect the world to be diverse. Virgilio Elizondo would say that God chose to come in the body of a brown-skinned, multiracial, Afro-Semitic, poor Jewish Palestinian boy so that we all could see ourselves in the flesh. I like that. You like that? Yeah. What do you think about that?
I work a lot with white congregations.
Yeah.
And so one of their presenting issues, when I go in as in a consulting role, their presenting issue is we're in decline. We don't know what to do. It's clear when I look at the demographics, there aren't any more of these people getting made in that neighborhood. And so the answer to their question is pretty obvious. There are people around them, but they don't see them. And they have not the first clue about their obligation to reach out to the stranger, to prepare themselves to welcome them in, to understand their story, to be able to find common ground together. I had in one session with a planning team in a church that, by the way, was multicultural, but not in the way of reaching the Latino community, which was mushrooming around them. They said to me, those people they're not like us. We have nothing in common. And I said, well, have you realized the possibility that they're here and they want quality education, they want safe communities, they want their children to have opportunities, they want to be able to care for themselves, have adequate health care. Do any of these things ring a bell for you as similarities? So when we aren't open to something, we don't see it. And that's going on in an epidemic way, I think, across predominantly white churches, but even also in already ethnically mixed congregations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is our 12th conference, guys, we can't even believe that, it's for people who want to be who are in multi-ethnic, multiracial congregations. And that you're here thrills us, blows our mind. That my church works hard. Give a woot, middle church people, woot! That we work hard to try to be a part of what I'm going to say is a interreligious, multi-faith movement for love and justice that's happening across the nation. Many of us in the room are Auburn Senior Fellows. We're connected to each other, doing justice work together. Many of you in the room are writing, thinking about this. I love getting notes from my friend Ruby Sales' front porch, doing movement building. All of us are here because we do that. So I want to show you a little clip film that my team made about the movement doing that is middle church. We think that we're called, all of us who are people of faith, to be working in the spaces to create a multiracial, multicultural, everybody has enough, safe world. And we do that in our public theology, which happens inside this place, but also outside. So take a look at what we think revolutionary love looks like.
They showed such love is an action, it's a verb, not a word, to abuse and take lightly, sorta said to be heard. And everyday actions and reactions are chances to make love active and not just a word. Oh, love does not envy, it does not boast, hey, it does not house conceit. There's no limit to God's grace, and there's consider how you love.
When I came to Middle 14 years ago, we were a beautiful white church with enough black folks to feel like we were multiracial. We were, and we were great about that, happy about that. But when Trayvon Martin got killed, we got really clear that being multiracial actually wasn't enough, that we really needed to be anti-racist and purpose ourselves to that. And air kisses in the sanctuary in our diversity wasn't going to quite get it, you know? So we've been really pushing ourselves in this movement. Not only showing up with our friends when Ben the Ark does a die-in DC, you go, you do a die-in in Harlem, you march in New York City streets, we go to the Women's March, not only showing up to march, but really going inside our hearts and asking ourselves, what do we need to let go of? So we formed an anti-racist task force this last year, and 9 months, blacks and whites and Latinos and Asian folks lived together in community, read together, studied together, pushed each other, had hard talks, and are still in good relationship with one another. Just a way to sort of entrench our commitment to this work. I want to tell you a story that's not just like, woo, we're doing a great job story either, which is the conversation on Black Lives Matter. As committed as we are to multiracial life, as committed as we have been to anti-racist work, I got in a little bit of trouble about Black Lives Matter here in my beautiful congregation as a leader. I think I probably preached 8 sermons in a row on Black Lives Matter. Yeah, it's okay to clap for that. I felt really good about it. But what I realized is that even though we looked like we were ready, we weren't quite ready. We weren't quite ready. I hadn't quite done the work, the groundwork, the explanation work, the training work, the paragraph, the 2 paragraphs that go with Black Lives Matter. You know what I mean? Like when black incarceration rates are down, when education, when median income, right? When school districts, when voting rights are not rolled back, when all of that, like the 10 things that let you know that Black lives really matter. When that happens, when Black lives matter, then all lives matter. And the more I dropped back to teach about it, the more one-on-ones I did to talk about it, the more ways that we got vulnerable about it and people asked questions and like, what do you mean? The more my congregation came along and got it and we got it. I will never forget singing at one of our UU church friends, and our gospel choir was singing, and one of the women that struggled with it the most just went, oh, Jacqui, I see what you mean. So our sign is flashing outside now, Black Lives Matter, and we get it, right? When Black lives matter, then our lives will all matter.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Alaikum salam.
Peace and greetings. I am so honored and privileged to be sitting up here with Jacqui and her incredible husband. I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart for the incredible work that they are doing, as well as Middle Church and all of the sponsors for putting on this incredible conference. Man, you guys are so lucky to be here because it's going to be a fun-filled educational weekend that you are going to leave here feeling like the hell with what's happening in the world. We are going to make a difference.
Woo!
As I sat and I listened to both presentations, I started to take notes, and Simran responded to me. He's like, did you prepare for this? I said, no, because the great thing is we get to respond to whatever they say. I love those kind of presentations when I'm asked to actually respond to what people say. And as I sat here and I listened, I was like, oh my God, so many things just came to my mind that I felt like were so critical for me. The connections. One of the things that came up for me is like, we need to break away from the chains of racism. Mm-hmm. Those chains are physical as well as invisible, and we need to make sure that we break those chains. We need to do that by acknowledging our past, and acknowledging our present. And when I say our past, let us not forget this nation was built on the backs of Black people.
Amen. On land
If it weren't
stolen.
for them, this country wouldn't be where it is today. In addition, to acknowledge that immigrants are also responsible for where we are today. And there is no one in this room, unless you are a Native American Indian, that could say to me, this is your land. We all came from somewhere. And so it is critical for us to pay homage to our sisters and brothers of the Native American Indian community.
Yes.
So critical. And as I sat here and I kept thinking about what was being said, an image came to my mind, and it was this inclusive umbrella. This umbrella that we as communities everywhere can create, where each and every person, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their culture, their sexual orientation, can simply fit under comfortably as a place of refuge and a place to belong and to be celebrated and valued. And that's what we need to do. We are the change makers right here sitting in this room. Mm-hmm. We are the ones that are able to create these communities. And as I was hearing more about our history and where we came as a people in this country, I had this really provocative thought, and especially when the whole idea of national security came up. I have to tell you guys, the only national security threat that exists in our nation right now is in the White House.
Woo!
And the very people who are leading in that White House are the national threat to our country. By the actions and the executive orders and the positions that they are taking, they are making us an unsafe nation. And as I sat and I pondered, the provocative thought that I had was, have you ever wondered why the White House is called the White House? Those who designed it didn't have all of us in mind. Jacqui, did they?
No.
Simran, did they?
No.
It really started
So
to
they
make
freaked
me...
out so much when Barack Obama was in there. What?
I really started to just think more and more about this. But let us not forget, the White House was built by forefathers who were white. They were not thinking about all of us. And the only time that this narrative was disrupted was by the Obama presidency. That 8 years changed that narrative. Now, unfortunately, we are living in a state of white supremacy ruling, going back to the very days of when our nation was actually founded. And so, how do we reclaim what we did in the last 8 years with President Obama? Where do we pick up those pieces? And how do we create those communities? And I'm not going to be sitting here and being Pollyanna with you, because there were things that happened under President Obama. As great as the president he was, let us not forget that the largest number of people being deported from the United States happened under his watch.
That's right. That's right.
The largest number of bombs that were released in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and many parts of the Middle East were under his watch. So though there were all of these atrocities that were happening, there were also good things that were happening, and it's really critical for us to acknowledge those things and know that there is no perfect president living or residing in the White House that has ever done anything that didn't have any negative things. I almost feel like we need to do a petition to change the name of the White House.
What would you call it, Debbie?
The People's House.
There we go.
Right? The People's House.
I like
We are the ones that actually put those people in that office, and we should certainly be able to call it whatever we want.
I'm a little surprised no one said this yet, but Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Islamophobia is real, and my latest reminder of that was this morning. I was filming down on Wall Street with Auburn Seminary for a video, and a man came up and was saying some things, and I wasn't sure I heard him correctly. I couldn't tell if he was being aggressive, and I said, "What's that?" And he said, "What do you mean, what's that? We're gonna get rid of all you motherfuckers." And we know what he meant. We know who he thought I was. And we know where he's getting these messages, right? These things are clear to all of us. I think one of the things I've been thinking about quite a lot in this context is how do we respond in situations like this that align with our values, right? If we're sitting here declaring that we intend to live a life of revolutionary love, what is the response in that situation? And I've been dealing with these issues my whole life. I grew up in Texas, and so you can imagine. And I'm still, 35 years later, still struggling with how to do that in an ethical, loving, compassionate way, right? And in this moment, and for those of you who are from here in New York, you'll know what I'm talking about. He was a man who had all of his possessions with him. He was looking for confrontation. He looked mentally unstable to me. He was black. And so for me, what does love look like in the moment where I don't have trust in our criminal justice system? Yeah. I don't have trust in the way our society thinks about mental illness, right? And I don't actually have trust that any bystander or upstander in the area would be thinking about a response that's rooted in these values that surround revolutionary love. So here's something that I think, having grown up in this country, looking the way I do and having practiced responses in these situations, that I think the Sikh community has to offer others, right? So here's the narrative, the thesis that I want to present to you all. The Sikh community, like Christians, are not direct targets of Islamophobia, right? We are sort of collateral damage in a sense. What I've seen from the Sikh community that I haven't seen from the Christian community is a sense of authentic solidarity, so that when we are targeted in moments like this, we are now conditioned to respond in a way that doesn't throw another community under the bus. I don't say, and I don't know any Sikh who says, go after them, right? Because I'm not them. I'm not who you mean. I'm not the enemy. And we do that. We stick with solidarity because we have developed a response that's rooted in values, right? So for me, it's not about, hey, if this happens, do this. It's not formulaic. It is real, deeply conditioned spiritual work. And this is what you were saying, right? I think it is profoundly badass to say anti-racist work is a spiritual discipline, because I don't actually know any other way that's real, that's sustainable, that's profound, that's meaningful, and that actually addresses the core problems that we need to be addressing.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we need to be thinking, right? This point, and you said it in your remarks as well, and I was struck by it, that anti-racist work has to be spiritual discipline, because if it's not, then we end up perpetuating the same cycles of violence that we're trying to escape. And 20 years from now, 40 years from now, our kids, my daughter, will be stuck in that same hole.
Yeah.
That's what I've been thinking about, and I hope it's helpful to those of you here. But I'm very interested to hear, your responses and how you think. I have an opportunity to really learn what you mean when you say anti-racist work is spiritual discipline. I think that's fascinating.
Thank you, Simran. Thank you so much. Yeah. I was outraged. I can't even believe I don't know exactly how I got it. But that hurt a Muslim, punish a Muslim. Did you see that? And some people didn't see it. And that, I want to say thank God that you didn't see it. But it came out of Great Britain. And it was punish a Muslim, and the research or let's say the forensic investigation, maybe it's the same guy who did something before another campaign, but blow up a mosque for points. Throw chemicals on Muslims for points. Pull off a hijab or kufi. Huh? Nuke Mecca. And so this goes around and we see each other's things and we try to dive into each other's things. And Debbie was out passing out kufis and headscarves in Brooklyn. And in solidarity, Christians, Jews with you, yeah. It's Christians, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, atheists that go lay down together in a tangle of bodies on the ground. Remember in DC, where you didn't know who was who. We're just all on the ground in the cafeteria in the nation's capital where the mucky mucks eat. Afraid, really, of the black boots approaching you, and then you're going to get the shit kicked out of you. But together. So this is what I think, my brother. You are my brother. When I grew up, I really didn't know what a Sikh was. A Sikh was, we heard, a Sikh. How would I know? I didn't know. But then you get to be friends with Valerie and you get to know. You find out about the thing, and the woman, and the warrior, and the writing on the thing, and let's go into the fire, and right? And so then you know. But if you never have a relationship outside of your little box, you're not going to know. And I think I met you before I met Valerie, right, at an Auburn thing. I think so, right? And you've prayed this most beautiful prayer at this mountaintop thing. So then you're curious. So I think anti-racist means anti-xenophobia. I think it means anti-hatred. I think it means anti-Islamophobia. I think it means anti-Semitism. I think it means, guys, that the rigorous work we have to do is to be, not squint our eyes and pretend like we have the same stuff, because we don't. But to really be curious, like a holy curiosity about each other's stories and each other's faith perspectives and what makes each other tick and itch, and to find the Venn diagram of sameness, that love is love is love, and we have to love each other. So I put on my thing. I tried to tie it. I tried to make my hijab look like yours, because you have like the sexiest hijab ties ever, right? And it kind of fell apart by the time I got to work. I went by the masjid out there. But I did my thing and put it in the world, and I will stand with you. That's my job as a Christian. I'm going to say it more hyperbolic than I should, but to make a point. If we don't understand the one we follow into ministry, Christians, as a guy who was a Jew, he wasn't a Christian. Hello. He was a Jew. So Christianity starts in otherness, in Judaism. And it starts in the Jewish marginalized people being othered by the Roman Empire. It starts there. That's who we are. We're the people who were born in poverty, born in otherness, born in outsiderness, whose boss is a Jewish Palestinian brown baby boy who was homeless and a refugee. If we don't start there, we don't end in love. That's how I would answer your question. Is that what you want to say about? What you got? Say something more.
No, yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. And I think what I'm seeing in this country is there's the ugliness that we've talked about, but I'm also seeing a moral reckoning, and a reckoning with race in a way that I haven't seen. I mean, I'm a historian. I haven't seen people talking about white supremacy and whiteness and what that means in a way that's simultaneously systemic and personal.
Right.
That hasn't happened.
That's right.
And I see Parker Palmer in the crowd, and one of the most touching pieces I've ever read about this was his work on his own reckoning with white supremacy, and him confessing to his wide readership that, hey, I participate in these same systems, and I'm confronting that. And what that does for us, right, he as a leader and us as leaders in this room can model what that is, but only if we're vulnerable enough to confess our own shortcomings.
That's right.
Right, and I think
That's
I think that's what you're talking about, right?
That's exactly right. And that's why I'm married to that white dude. because he is that guy. I mean, John's white. He's not white. But I think his, just like to be clear, he's not passing. But a kind but a kind of heart. Well, when we were on our honeymoon. Can I tell this story? I'm going to make you so mad.
Wait. She always does this. Can I share this? But she asked it in front of all of you.
Yeah.
So,
Don't you want to hear it? When we were on our honeymoon, we went to Spain. We went to Malaga, and we had such a good time. And I had been teasing John, because my then musician, I won't say his name, he'd be really, really mad, but he has gray hair, but he would always just put a little blonde in his hair, and that was kind of sexy. All the gray-haired people who put a little blonde in their hair. So I said, when we're out traveling, we'll just mess around, because you can experiment, because you're gone for 3 weeks. So I bought this dye, this hair dye, at the store in Spain. I thought I understood the Spanish, but clearly I was wrong. So I wasn't putting a little blonde in John's hair. I was putting a little brunette in John's hair. And so I'm looking at the hair, and it's like getting really dark. And I didn't make a mistake about it. It just needs time to develop. It's just developing. So by the time the dark hair, by the time John's hair was finished being dyed, it was so dark that I started calling him Juan Carlos. So in that one moment in time, he was kind of passing for a Latino, okay? But otherwise, he doesn't pass. So then we had to go to the salon that really didn't speak any English. And I was all making sign languages, because I didn't speak enough Spanish to get that stuff out. And they put some pink something in there, and it took his hair back to gray. So that's my John passing story. Anyway. A good-natured white man. Always, I fell in love with him at work when we worked for a think tank. And I was supposed to be the expert on culture and race. And all those white men who would look past me and around me and not talk to me. I was getting a damn PhD in race, okay? And they'd be like, oh. And John would always say, wait. What's Jacqui think about that? Jacqui, what do you think about that? Okay.
well, thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
I'd like to circle back to the question about how this work needs to be a spiritual discipline. And so you're asking a good question, and I think you partially answered it in considering how we are spiritual people in the world. And we have this habit of dividing off the spiritual from everything else and having it as a separate category. But I think in terms of becoming anti-racist, that work has to be a spiritual discipline. We cannot wake up one morning and declare that we are anti-racist. So part of the spiritual discipline for me is a commitment to educate ourselves on these issues. And that's not something one does over a short period of time. It's something one does over the stretch of their life because it's relearning paradigms. It's discovering new things about oneself and about the world around you. And you have to develop a language to talk about this stuff. We're not given the language. We have to learn the language. And so spiritual discipline for me, especially in the context of a faith community, is that we have opportunities to enter into this spiritual space around these issues and talk about them honestly. And for heaven's sake, read something. We have congregations. I am just flabbergasted at how little reading goes on and how little curiosity there is about this stuff. So there is, for us who are faith leaders, part of our task, a critical part of our task, is to be educators and bring together people and say, would you read this book with me? Would you read it with each other? And then can we talk about it? So that we're resourcing our faith community. That's part of a spiritual discipline. Not to be passive, but to get on the path. Even if you're, it looks like it takes several jumps to get on the path, but get on the path and take time to explore the issue.
Thank you. Debbie, you want to get in there? Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. That was really, really critical what you just said, because I was thinking about it as well. And in two areas we have to educate ourselves. One, in our own spiritual background, really understanding what does our faith tradition say about racism, and really becoming grounded. I don't think there is any faith tradition that supports racism. So looking at that, understanding what our faith traditions tell us about being welcoming and inclusive of the stranger and creating opportunities for people to live in respect and dignity, with respect and dignity. The other piece is also understanding our history as a people and learning the histories of other people. And I thank my brother Simran for bringing up the whole concept of Islamophobia. It's real. It's real. And the community that is feeling the brunt of it, or forgive me for this, carrying the burden of the cross, is the Sikh community from everybody that's affected. So understanding that history is so critical. What we see today in the United States and Europe is that Islam is this foreign religion that's just newly arrived. I have news for you. Yeah, I have news for you. Islam has been in these United States or North American continent as early as 1178, okay? Even before this nation was founded. And you can learn about this history, just go to the Harvard Pluralism Project, and you will see a rich timeline that gives you an understanding of how long Islam has been in this country, and that it is not foreign. And we have two sources to blame for this. One, the media, because every time that they want a story, they immediately go to immigrant communities that are Muslim and give them that interview and ask them to be interviewed. You never see an African American speaking on behalf of Islam. How many of you have even seen an African American? Indulge me and raise your hand if you've seen an African American Muslim. Okay, the number is not that large. But it's critical. There is nobody that could speak on behalf of Islam than African American Muslims. They sacrifice for Islam.
Yes.
They sacrifice their lives. They worked so hard to make sure that Muslims like me who came to this country have the opportunity to be able to have our faith tradition respected in this country. And so it's really critical to understand the history of the peoples of these United States and understand where people come from. I'm also flabbergasted that here we are 17 years later, after September 11th, and we still have a lot of Americans who don't know the difference between a Sikh and a Muslim man. It's outrageous. And it's because of the ignorance and lack of education of how important it is for us to get to know the peoples that reside in this country. And a lot of what's happening today is based on the fear of this nation becoming a majority minority. And that's what's driving what we are seeing.
It's right, and it's coming.
It's coming. And we're not going away.
It's coming. We're not going anywhere. Actually, Diana X Pluralism Project says Islam actually is the fastest growing religion in America, growing faster than Presbyterians, growing faster than Episcopalians, Catholics, or Jews is Islam.